And then finally, number 10, be patient with yourself. You know, I don't know. I think this is common human experience. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I'm prone to making moral judgments about my performance. I'm not happy with myself when I feel like a class didn't go well. And I'll walk away from a live session where I screwed up the answer or where I couldn't figure out the right answer to the problem and feel like I didn't do a very good job. I observe this all the time in other people, right? I observe people being discouraged because they haven't yet figured it out, or being discouraged because they say, I can't figure this out. I've worked and worked and worked on this and I just can't seem to do it. I don't think I'm a stupid person, but, and, you know, that process of making a value judgment about yourself based on some kind of performance is an impediment to actually being effective, is a barrier to getting this job done, to getting your website up to and to it helping your business. If for no other reason than negative moral self-judgment leads you to be discouraged, right? I do hear this all the time from people that I worked and worked and worked on this and I got really discouraged. I just had to put it down and I'm going to come back and take a look at it again tomorrow. Well, that's making a negative self-judgment about yourself, right? A negative moral judgment, a negative value judgment about yourself that for some reason or another, you should be able to get this. And since you didn't get this, there's something wrong with you. So my suggestion is that you think about this as if you were teaching someone you cared about how to do this or how to do something. Would you encourage them to think that way about themselves? So if it was your son or your daughter or your wife or your friend and you were helping them figure something out and they said, "Oh my gosh, I'm just not getting this." Would you say, "Well, God, you must be a stupid person." Or, "How can you be so thick? You're just not figuring it out." You wouldn't say that to somebody else you cared about. And I encourage you to treat yourself in that same way. Entirely aside from this whole question of negative moral judgment based on performance. My wife is 5'4", and I think she ranges anywhere between 126 pounds when she's absolutely delighted with herself and 134 pounds when she is disgusted with herself. All about her body image and her feeling about herself has an 8-pound span that is entirely irrational. She doesn't think of it as irrational, and she will say it's not irrational, and then she'll say, "See, this is what I look like when I'm 134 pounds," and then when she gets down to 126 pounds, she'll say, "See how good I look now that I'm down to 126 pounds." But it's entirely irrational. We have 4 adult daughters now, and if any of our daughters said that sort of thing about themselves out loud, she would be mortified. Right? She wouldn't wish that negative judgment on anybody else, but she'll inflict it on herself every single day. I encourage you to attempt to implement that as you're working in the process of learning, that you judge yourself in the same way that you would judge somebody else that you cared about. If you're impatient with yourself while you are learning how to do this or you're working on how to do this, impatience means that you haven't given yourself the time to learn. And if you don't give yourself the time to learn, you're just going to spend time frantically flailing around. I had a guy call me last weekend who's been a long-time member of the site, but it's been a long time since he worked in WordPress. He kind of forgot some of the basics of WordPress. He's never built an e-commerce site in his life, but at cocktail hour on Friday afternoon, I get a call from him because he's got to have his e-commerce site up by Sunday. Well, And he spent the last day flailing around at it, right? Since it's got to be done by Sunday, he doesn't have time to watch any of the videos. Since it's got to be done by Sunday, he doesn't have time to relearn some things that he has forgotten. That kind of impatience doesn't give him the time that it really takes in order to learn how to do something. And so the only possible result from that is flailing and failure. Right? There's no possibility of success on something as complex as building an e-commerce site in WordPress. When you've never done it before, you don't have the skill set, and you don't have the time. And that kind of impatience really means that you don't respect the enterprise, right? Because learning how to do this is challenging. I can tell you, I've helped thousands of people work on their websites in one way or another. And every one of them has found some aspects of it challenging. I have found this process very challenging many times. And if you don't respect it, you don't anticipate it being challenging, at which point when you run into the challenge, you feel like you're not a good enough person, or you're not doing it right, or you haven't taken all the necessary steps, or something is wrong because you aren't able to build this e-commerce website in a weekend. And, what you're trying to learn when you're trying to build your own website is challenging. There are many things and many aspects of it that will be challenging. Some of them you may find very difficult. But if that wasn't the case, people wouldn't be doing this for a living, right? If it wasn't the case, you would be able to go pay somebody $50 to build your website for you if it wasn't a challenge, if it wasn't complex, if it didn't require you to learn things, if it didn't require specialized skills. So it's essential that you recognize that there are challenges to be met while you are learning how to do this, and to be patient with yourself and to be patient with the process. Not to become discouraged, not to beat yourself up, not to make moral value judgments about yourself because you're learning something, because you wouldn't do that to your kid, right? You wouldn't make a negative judgment about your 5-year-old daughter or your 5-year-old granddaughter because she was struggling learning how to read. You just wouldn't do that sort of thing. And since you wouldn't do that with them, you shouldn't do that with yourself, because this is a real thing that really takes some time, energy, and effort to learn. And you should really be patient with yourself. Okay. So, what were those 10 points? Understand the business purpose of your site, right? That's going to be your moral compass, right? That's going to be your compass for evaluating and making value judgments about where you should spend your time and where you shouldn't, what sorts of things you should try to learn, and what kinds of stuff you can set to the side. Understand your business purpose of your site. Know your limitations, or honestly acknowledge your skill level, and choose which of those limitations you're going to stretch, and which of those limitations you're going to live within, and which of those you're going to ameliorate simply by hiring somebody. Make a plan. Make sure you don't just dive in and start swinging the baseball bat around. You want to make a plan. Come up with a system of how is your site going to be organized? What are the pages going to look like? What pages am I going to create? That kind of thing. Make yourself a plan. Less is more. You don't need a ton of widgets in a sidebar. Chris Pearson says you shouldn't have a sidebar at all. Sidebars they just distract people from making decisions. You should only have one call to action on a page. If you feel like you need more calls to action, you need to sprinkle them around so that one page has one call to action, another page has another call to action. You should use emphasis like spice. You should expect people to make fewer decisions, not more decisions. So you should have less navigation elements rather than more navigation elements. Maintain your focus. Your job is to get your website done, and you're not going to get your website done if you look at all of the world of possibilities. So pick a direction, focus in on that direction, and spend all your energies going in that direction without really thinking about other potential directions that you could take. Spend 80% of your time working on the substance of your site and 20% of your time on how to do all that stuff. Most of your time should be writing your content, making your videos, doing the things that are going to convince people to go to your place of business, to call you on the telephone, to execute that business purpose of the site. Employ progressive refinement. That is, the site doesn't have to be perfect, and no single part of it's going to be perfect. You want to lay down one layer and then lay down another layer and then lay down another layer and then lay down another layer and then tweak and refine and change. Don't sweat the small stuff, embrace imperfection, and be patient with yourself.